I'm Janet Cox. I lead Climate Action California, and I'm really happy to have all of you here today. This is the January version of this series of trainings that we do twice a year. We do them in January at the beginning of the legislative session and at roughly in June, about halfway through. And the content's a little different each time. This time, we're really happy that we have as co-sponsors a couple of groups that we work with a lot, the Climate Reality Project California Coalition and Third Act SoCal. We've done these with Third Act and we've done with both of these groups before. And it's just great to have everybody here. I I want to start out by introducing Kathy Schaefer, who works with us and also with Climate Reality, and she'll tell you a little bit about Climate Reality.
Thank you, Janet. The Climate Reality Project was founded by former Vice President Al Gore, and the very first training that he did on climate change he did was for 50 people in his barn in Carthage, Tennessee in 2006. And since that first training, the mission of community-based change has been the foundation of Climate Reality. And in 2008, he traveled to India for the first eco camp. And since those early years, Vice President Gore has traveled around the world several times, training thousands of change makers who have then gone on to train people in their own communities. Climate Reality is a global organization, and there are currently 9 chapters in California that work together on a number of issues. And we are also super fortunate to be able to collaborate with Climate Action California. We learn so much from each other, and we're happy to be a part of this tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. And I have to say, Kathy plays a huge role for us. She organizes meetings that we have on Zoom with legislators. Last year, there were more than 75. They're very well organized, very informative, and they really kind of they along with the capital team, which you're going to hear about. We've really upped our game in the last couple of years. I also want to introduce the people who are going to be presenting tonight. Lily Edelman Gold works on our capital team. Amanda Martin is our highly competent administrator, and Linda Hutchins Knowles is our volunteer coordinator. And I just going to ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly. Tell us a little bit about yourself. So, Lily.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. As
Oops.
Bill said,
Yeah, good. You're on.
did that work?
Yep, it's good.
Um, I'm part of the Capital team. I live in Sacramento. I've got a background in climate policy. Particularly, I worked at the Energy Commission and Caltrans for a little while, so I have background in energy and transportation. But very passionate about climate change and really happy to be here and to be talking to you all today.
Thank you, Lily. And Amanda.
Yes, hello everyone. I probably know a good number of you, but for those who don't know much about me, I actually come from an entertainment industry background, nothing to do with policy whatsoever, which should give you all hope if you feel like you don't know enough about policy, that you can do it too, because I took a major transition to get into environmental policy, which has become such a huge part of what I care about and my passion. So. I joined CAC first as a volunteer, probably a little over a year ago, and I've been so grateful to work with such a fantastic group of people who are so knowledgeable and so welcoming, and so happy to be here helping to present.
Thank you. And Linda.
Yes, hi everybody. Hi everybody. So glad to see you all here tonight. I'm Linda Hutchins Knowles. I do volunteer coordinating and campaign supporting for Climate Action California. I've met a lot of you, but if I haven't met you yet and you want to get involved, you'll see a link to do that at the end. I love welcoming volunteers. I've been a climate activist for the past decade or so, a former educator turned climate advocate, believing that this is the greatest challenge that we're facing and wanting to make sure everybody who's concerned about the climate has a way to join a group like ours to make a difference. So I've been really fortunate to be part of this amazing team, really pushing the dial for climate smart climate policy. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Linda. And Linda is going to be watching the questions that show up in the chat and answering some of them. And we're going to stop. The way we're going to work this is we're going to stop for questions at a few likely spots through the presentation, and then we'll take more at the end. So we're glad to make this a conversation with everyone. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to start out talking about the structure of the legislature. I should say that tonight's presentation is about how the legislature works and how we follow it as we track bills and work with the legislature in a bunch of ways. The next week's installment at the same time next Wednesday is more about how all of us interact with our legislators in the district or in meetings, or sort of how we kind of make friends and get inside their heads, which is what we want to do. So next slide. So here's the basics. We have a bicameral legislature, which is the way the federal government ought to work, although I'm not sure they're really bicameral at this point. Bills that are introduced have to pass both houses before going to the governor to sign them. And as you'll be hearing, the legislative year is in about two parts, where the bills make it through one house and then they sort of start up again and have to make it through the second house. California is a very blue state, and we do have supermajorities in both houses. The law says that it takes 2/3 to pass any kind of tax or urgency statutes, and Democrats have 2/3 in both houses, although part of the way they get to 2/3 is by including some Democrats that are relatively conservative. Next slide, please. Next, okay. So there are 40 senators with 4-year terms, 80 assembly members with 2-year terms. And so the senators, the assembly members run for office in all even numbered years, and the senators get a break. But it's pretty intense. There are term limits, which mean that even if you start out in the assembly and you move over to the Senate, you've still got a maximum of 12 years before you have to leave. And this really causes craziness where when people are about to term out, they tend to look for other offices to run for. And I can't believe this is constructive, but it's what we're stuck with. Next slide, please. So as you can see, and you can't really see, but you just sort of squint at these maps and you'll get a sense. This is the map of assembly districts, and then next slide, the Senate district. So the Senate districts are roughly twice the size of assembly districts. But in both cases, you can see that the sort of LA, San Diego axis and the Bay Area are pretty much target-rich environments for our work. Next slide, please. So uh, we have 2-year sessions. 2026 is the beginning of the current, 2025 was the beginning of the current session. We're in the second year of the session in 2026. And one of the things we're trying to do in January is pass 2-year bills that didn't make it in 2025. Someone asked what a 2-year bill is. So ideally, if it's going to be simple, a legislator will introduce a bill in the first year of the session, and it will get through the first house, through the second house, get passed, and go into effect the following January. 2-year bills are bills that stall somewhere along the way in that first year. And depending on how they get stuck and what the votes are like when that happens, the author may have the option to bring them back as 2-year bills in the second year. And a lot of difficult climate legislation turns into 2-year bills because it's just hard to get the support at the rate that you need to get it. But it's also true that it's a little harder to pass tough legislation in the second year because that's an election year. And oil and gas, for instance, have wheelbarrows full of campaign cash that they roll around the Capitol. So it's always hard and it's always interesting. Another thing to note is that this session, the leadership of both houses has said that there's a hard cap of 35 bills that each member can introduce for the entire 2-year session. And this has made it quite a lot more difficult for groups like us to successfully propose legislation because there is a huge amount of pressure on everybody to run their favorite lobbyists' favorite bills. And we'll be hearing about some of our priorities in a minute. Next slide, please. So I just want to talk for a second about who some of the players are. You know, politics is all about people. And I guess one of the things that makes this work so fascinating to me is just kind of watching the dynamics between different players in this game. And we're just having a really interesting time this year with a new leader in the state Senate. So next slide, please. So Monique Limon has just taken over as the Senate President pro tem. She's a really nice, smart person that everybody loves. She's very diplomatic. She is a fierce climate warrior. I think it says something good about the Senate that they made her the leader this time. It's really interesting watching her committee appointments, which are very important for reasons we'll talk about in a minute. But I'm really hopeful that she is going to be able to accomplish some hard stuff this year. She's just, I don't know, she's just the right person, I think, at the right time. And we really got lucky. So there's a line on this slide that says negotiates with the Speaker of the Assembly and talks to the governor. this is a very important role. Arguably, she's the second most important politician in the state. And Governor Newsom always seems to have kind of a challenging relationship with the legislature. I just have a feeling that Lamone is going to be better at working with him than some of her predecessors. Next slide, please. So her committee appointments are super important. So as a bill moves through the process, is reviewed by committees. And the committees have the ability to impose amendments on the bill, whether the author wants them or not. And often the bill analysis that is written by the committee staff, and these are really accomplished people in most cases, have a lot of influence on the trajectory of that bill. It really matters who the chair is. And one of the things that Lamone has done is to switch up the chairs of some committees that are super important to us. So John Laird from Santa Cruz is the new budget chair. And I think that's a really good thing. Ben Allen from Santa Monica, who last year was the chair of an important budget subcommittee working on climate and the environment, is now the chair of the Senate Energy Committee, which is a really important spot. Josh Becker, who chaired the Energy Committee last year and has been the author of the most important legislation trying to drive down the cost of electricity for everybody and promote renewables, is now the chair of Natural Resources and Water, which is going to be really interesting. And there's a new committee, Emergency Management, which is chaired by Senator Henry Stern, who is also a climate champion we've been working with for a long time. The most interesting appointment that Lamone has made is of Senator Sabrina Cervantes as Appropriations Chair. She's pretty new. She's not very climate-y. I don't have a really strong impression of her, but one of the things about appropriations is that appropriations kind of makes live or die decisions about bills. Arguably, this is where politics come into play as bills are reviewed through the sausage making process. And a lot is going to hinge on Senator Cervantes' relationship with Lamone, and we're just going to have to wait and see. Next slide, please. This is Sabrina Cervantes. And the interesting thing on this slide is that she's taking over from Senator Ana Caballero, who is quite conservative and was, I thought, a surprising pick as appropriations chair from Lamone's predecessor, Mike McGuire. Next slide, please. And then we get to the assembly. And this is Robert Rivas, who has only been speaker since July 2023. Very, very powerful person. And it's going to be super interesting to see what comes out of the inevitable collaboration that he's going to be having with Lamone. Next slide. So these are the assembly committees that we are working with all the time. Isaac Bryan is normally on our side and very articulate, fun to listen to. Ash Kalra is an assembly member from San Jose who we've known well for years. And he's a great chair for judiciary, I think. His background is a public defender. Buffy Wicks is a former, I guess I have another slide about Buffy Wicks. She came from the Obama administration, and she tends to kind of line up with Rivas. Next slide, please. Here's Buffy. She has also taken some stands that she would probably describe as compromising on CEQA to promote housing, but we're very concerned about the ongoing assaults on CEQA, which you're going to hear about in a minute. Next slide. Oh, that's it. Questions? Linda, do we have questions in the chat?
There was one that wasn't answered yet. The rest were, and this question comes from Gregory, I believe. Is there any hope of public financing of elections in California? It's truly bad that this won't happen anytime soon in the federal Congress. Any hope of public financing for our statewide elections?
Oh, it's an interesting question. So Gail Pellerin from Santa Cruz is the assembly member who heads the Assembly Elections Committee. We met with her last week, but we didn't really, that this was not something that we brought up. I think it'd be pretty hard because people really count on those contributions, but it's a great idea. Mm. There was a question that just came up about
Yeah.
writing the scoping plan.
Mm-hmm. Who is responsible for writing laws to implement the scoping plan?
Well, that's a great question. So the scoping plan is a document that the California Air Resources Board puts out every 5 years that kind of lays out their regulatory agenda going forward. And most of what they propose, and I have to say, the last scoping plan that came out talked a good game, but it didn't include the implementation that I felt like we needed. Most of the implementation comes out of CARB, supported in the budget by trailer bills that may provide some guidance to CARB. But if in the cases where it's not clear that CARB is really taking their language seriously, then it can require legislation. So it's sort of an issue by issue answer, but that's a really good question.
I think we can't get
Other
to all of them, but another one is wondering if any of the Assembly Committee chairs are new.
We have not heard that Rivas is changing his committee appointments this year. It could still happen, but Limon 10 days or so ago released, I mean, she changed everything. She changed the committee member assignments as well as many of the chairs because she was new. But Rivas is continuing where he was last year. And, if he's unhappy with somebody, he may make a switch, but we haven't seen that. Anything else?
I think those are the main ones, and others been answered in the chat. So I think we're
Okay.
good. Yeah.
All right. So I think it's time to, oh, the legislature's year. The calendar is really important. And it's, we meet, Climate Action California meets every twice a month, Tuesday nights, 6 o'clock. And we always go over the legislative calendar to figure out where we are because this stuff moves very quickly, but it's good to know what the deadlines are. So the governor's budget came out on Saturday. The 2-year bills that I described, which are the bills that still have life in them, although they didn't pass in 2025. Hearings on those bills are happening now, and they need to be done by Friday, which is the 16th. Then what isn't showing up here, there's another deadline on January 23rd, which is the day when the appropriations committees will announce their decisions about those bills that made it out on the 16th. And then the January 31st is the last day that both houses can vote on those 2-year bills. So there are just a few of them that are hanging over, but they tend to be big. Some of the bills that we were really hoping would move, like the polluters pay climate superfund bills, apparently are not going to see daylight this month at all. But January 31st is a big deadline for 2-year bills. Then February 20th is the last day for members to introduce bills for 2026. And those introductions will happen. They're happening now. They'll dribble out a little faster toward the 20th. And it's right around then and after then that our teams will be analyzing a lot of bills to figure out what we support, what we'd like to change, what we want to oppose, and what we figure we can ignore. So hearings will then continue for a couple of months on those bills that are introduced by February 20th. And it'll all be over for the first House bills introduced in 2026 at the end of May. Does anybody have any questions about this? It's always a little confusing.
There was a question about why second year or 2-year climate bills often fail. And Kathy put a great answer in the chat, but not sure if you want to expand on that at all.
I can't see it. What did she say?
Yeah. Generally speaking, there aren't enough yes votes in the policy committees to move it forward. If it becomes a second year bill, it will most likely be amended to get agreement. And part of Matan's question is additionally, what measures can be taken to intervene within that window to make sure we can get 2-year climate bills through?
Well, there are definitely things that can be done. There's such a thing as a gut and amend, which means that an author has a bill that is going nowhere. And because you can amend a bill at any time during the whole process, you can pick up language from a bill that didn't make it and put it into a bill that is partway through the process and kind of start over that way. It sort of it depends in some ways on how a bill dies, because in some cases, if it's actually killed in committee or amended out of its original shape, then you sort of need to start over with a different bill. The other thing is that rules get waived all the time. In many cases, unless the rule is in the Constitution, rules can be waived with a majority vote of the body on the floor. So sometimes, and this happened, there was a lot of this going on at the end of the 2025 session. Um, that they'd been kind of working out of sight on some really big bills that got introduced at the last minute, really past the deadline, and they just waived a whole bunch of rules and even extended the session for another day and a half and managed to pass a whole lot of stuff. So there are a few ways around this.
And then one more question. I think you answered it, but just to make sure it's clear for Shauna, they're wondering what, for a second year bill, what saves it from just dying? Or do all bills that don't pass the first time have the opportunity to become 2-year bills?
I believe that practically all bills, for instance, if a bill is voted down in committee in the first year, it's technically dead. But if the author works out a compromise with the committee chair, then they might bring it back in January for reconsideration. Often when a committee essentially kills a bill, the author requests reconsideration and it's always granted. And reconsideration means you can come back sometime before the operative deadlines and re-enter, and we'll try again on this bill. Does that answer the question?
I think that's good. Yes.
Great, thanks.
Mhm.
So then this is the slide about all the other things that can happen, and what makes this so exciting is that, yes, amendments can pop up at any time, with or without the approval of the author, unfortunately. And so when we're following a bill, we really have to watch carefully. Gut and amend, I talked about it a minute ago. You can sort of take a nothing bill and drop some new language into it. And at that time, when that happens, that the amended bill starts wherever the previous bill was. So often the strategy toward the end of the year is to gut and amend a bill into a bill that has already passed the first house. It seems nasty to do this, but it happens quite a lot. And at that point, you try to get that bill through the second house, and then it goes back to the first house for concurrence, which is usually at 11:48 p.m. on the last night of the session. So it's pretty tricky. Um, the 72-hour rule means that a bill cannot be voted on the floor for 72 hours after amendments are in print. This was something that came up, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, and it was supposed to add some certainty about so you couldn't bring a bill up on the floor and amend it right there and then vote for the amended version. I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. And probably at our next training at the end of in the middle of the year, we'll talk more about appropriations, but appropriations votes practically all of the bills that they're going to rule on into something called the suspense file, where bills sort of sit in the dark while who knows who negotiates their fates. And then appropriations announces whether those bills are going to move out or be amended or just die in that closet called suspense. Next slide. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lily.
All right. Um, so I'll be talking a little bit about CAC's strategy and priorities in 2026. And you can go to the next slide. Although I'm going to start by saying before we talk too much about this slide, I do want to zoom out just a little and set up context with a look at the big picture for a second. California is the fourth largest economy in the world, and we really need to decarbonize it. To do that, we have to overcome a lot of resistance from very wealthy, well-connected industries and their trade associations. And this can be very challenging, except especially because they're so well connected and have relationships with legislators. So that's where our capital team comes in. Our connections at the Capitol are really important. Um, the Capitol team is made up of leaders based near Sacramento or in Sacramento. So they're showing up in person, getting into the room where it happens, going to the meetings, the committee hearings, etc. A key part of our strategy involves setting up our Capitol team members for success when they do go to those situations and speak with legislators about the bills that we support or oppose. Those in-person volunteers in Sacramento, though, rely on everyone else's expertise when it comes to the technical background of the bills. So, any information, experience, knowledge, or wisdom that you have about the policies themselves or the topics is really valuable to the Capitol team because it allows them to feel confident in what they're talking about. So, both are really important. We need boots on the ground in Sacramento, and we need supporting subject matter experts. But you also don't need to be in Sacramento to make a difference if you don't have a ton of expertise. Any of you can meet with legislators in your home districts, which increases our visibility with legislators and influence with committees. And then whether it's in Sacramento or in your home district, meeting with legislators, calling them, keeping up to date on how bills evolve. And Amanda will take us through on how to do that a little bit later. But coming to the meetings, all of this is helpful. So there are kind of a myriad of ways for everyone to participate and help for the cause, no matter your background. And all of this helps us strengthen our presence at the Capitol and positions us to help move the bills that we want to see get passed. So showing up in person also gives us an opportunity to build relationships with other advocacy groups and allies and represent our coalition members and allies at hearings. So even if you don't live in Sacramento, if you can make the trip even a couple of times, that's always very valuable as well. And you can go on to the next slide unless Janet has anything to add.
No, that's except that I'm just encourage everybody to show up when you can because it's really interesting and you learn a lot just watching these people talk to each other.
And it
And
can
you
be,
can also watch online,
I was
but
going to
it's
say it can be as easy as watching online. I've done that, and
right.
it was very fascinating.
Yeah. And everything is archived. So if you miss a hearing, you can tune in later.
So this year we're focusing on a few priority issues. The list of bills that we look at is very long, but a few rise to the top as particularly important for this year's legislature. In the aftermath of the Los Angeles fires, we're focusing on advocating for building back the area without gas, which includes eliminating utilities' obligation to serve gas to all customers and demonstrating that dual fuel construction is not economical. We'll also be focused on advocating for lowering the price of electricity for ratepayers, keeping an eye out for bills that affect electricity costs in general, supporting the transition to EVs, and promoting clean energy incentives. And then also eliminating the advanced manufacturing exemption for CEQA, which was jammed through the budget in the last session. All right, I think you can move to the next slide. There are also some requests that we're hoping can become legislation or get incorporated into the budget, such as helping certain clean tech become more easily available. Our policy teams came up with a substantial list of bill ideas, things we know we want to see happen. And as we looked at those proposals, we realized that some are good fit for this year. Some might make more sense as budget items rather than as a whole bill. And maybe some should wait for the next governor. And so these proposals are the ones that are the best fit for this year and the end of this session. Um, the list includes a bill that adds sulfuryl fluoride to CARB's list of short-lived climate pollutants. Sulfuryl fluoride, also known as SO2F2, is mainly used as a pesticide. So we're hoping to further restrict its use, and since it's also a greenhouse gas. And then we also plan to propose a bill that terminates a demonstration program mixing hydrogen with fossil fuel gas. Um, and then two issues that could be bills or budget line items are supporting municipalities looking to implement local climate action plans and eliminating the water's edge tax break for large corporations doing business in California but that are headquartered elsewhere. And then, as always, other issues will pop up throughout the year, so this list is likely to grow. And you can move to the next slide. So this is a short list of some of the organizations that have a presence in Sacramento. We end up becoming pretty familiar with them when we show up to meetings, and we have a pretty good sized coalition of groups that include 350 groups, climate reality groups, and Third Act. We work with a bunch of folks all towards the same end, which is really great. And it's great to get to know them and kind of establish relationships with them as we continue showing up at the Capitol. And then you can go to the next slide, and we'll see a list of what we call opposition, but they're not always exactly opposition. Um, we do often find ourselves on the opposing side of these groups, but it's really important to still talk to them because sometimes we can make common cause. And if we can, it's a whole lot easier for everybody. So some of these are pretty tough to agree with because they tend to oppose climate action in general. Um, but we're not really here to make anyone mad, and any places where you can find agreement is also really valuable. We've actually been on the same side as some of these groups for some bills, and we'd love to be on the same side of more of them. So continuing conversations and establishing relationships is really critical. And I think that's the end of my portion, Janet, so we can move to questions.
And I will be glad to elaborate on any of our bill proposal ideas that anybody wants to hear more about.
Great. There was some discussion in the chat, and some people have already responded, so you don't have to go in too depth, but just was any hope for polluter pays, the climate super fund being revived this year, maybe in a new vehicle. Um, just there's lots of interest in that
I
bill.
don't know. This is one of those things that can just take a really long time, but it's very worthwhile to keep on it. The Senator Caroline Menjivar and Assemblymember Don Addis, who are carrying these identical bills, um, I think there's a huge coalition behind them, and I think they've just decided that they can't make it this year. Um, and they may be also calculating that this governor wouldn't sign it anyway. So we're not giving up. One of the things that's happening is the coalition is encouraging all kinds of people to try to get municipal resolutions in favor of it, which is a very good idea. I mean, look at Los Angeles. How is Los Angeles ever going to have the wherewithal to build back what needs to be built? I mean, the oil companies are the only folks on the planet who have the resources to actually make whole what they have wrecked. And so we're not going to give up, but I think this is probably not the year.
Then there were some questions about different bill ideas, but I'm not sure if we want to get into that now or not.
I'd be happy to answer a couple of them because it was sort of shorthand in the
There's
in
one
the
that's pretty relevant to what we're working on. Lisa asks, how about a bill to prevent a utility from replacing old gas pipelines and instead installing heat pumps?
So we've just heard today and yesterday about a bill that um, isn't quite introduced yet that is kind of going to do that. Apparently, it costs 20 or $30,000 for a gas utility to establish a hookup in a house. And the proposal that we hear is going to turn into a bill will say that the utility has to offer an incentive to those prospective companies that is some significant portion of that amount of money not to install gas. This will work really well like in PG&E's service territory where the same utility is has both gas and electric. It's going to be much harder in Southern California where the gas utility is separate. But it's a great idea. And when this thing sees daylight, we're going to be all over it.
And someone asked if you could repeat the dollar figure you cited for the gas hookup cost.
$20,000 to $30,000 per house is what I've heard.
And then there was also interest in a balcony plug-in solar, but Jonathan shared that we are supporting Wiener's bill SB 868 on that topic. So
That's right.
that was addressed. So, and then Gregory's wondering about if we might, groups like ours, take a role in promoting what's called a midterm year National Democratic Unconventional Convention. I think it's the idea is to go back to being pro-democracy, pro-people, pro-planet. So I'm not sure if we get involved with that, but you could.
We really do kind of try to stick to California. I have to say, personally, the idea of a constitutional convention scares me to death because I don't necessarily trust everybody to make it better. But I don't know. And one thing I should have said earlier is that Prop 50, the redistricting proposition that we just passed, is only for Congress. It has no impact on the state legislature. Just got to throw that in there. I meant to say it earlier.
Yeah. And let's do one more. Lisa's asking, how about a bill to modernize California's bill making process? As you were talking about all the things like you can gut and amend a bill so that even if it failed in the first house, just all the shenanigans. So
I think that's really hard to do because everybody sort of loves their own exception. But I don't know. I don't know where that would come from. But it's a perfectly good idea because there are weird little wrinkles in the process.
I could add that one thing that we've tried to support, but it probably won't happen, is having remote public commenting be allowed again, like it was during the pandemic, right? And that's probably not likely, but it's kind of revision that would make it more democratic if they would do that.
We ran a big petition and a huge campaign for quite a long time without a whole lot of support from a couple legislators sort of said, yeah, maybe that'd be a good idea, but they weren't about to propose it. It's really tough. And actually our Capitol team probably wouldn't have invented it if it was still possible to do remote testimony. But I think the Capitol team is more effective than remote testimony anyway.
Yeah, I think those are the main questions from that section. Thank you both.
So next, over to Amanda.
Yes, thank you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen because I'm basically going to delve in how anybody who isn't near Sacramento can feel like they are also in the know, because I'm in Sherman Oaks, so I'm very far away. But even if I wasn't working for Climate Action California, I would want to be able to keep up on all the information that everybody's talking about. So I'm just going to share a couple of the main tools that we use and I use on a regular daily basis to keep up with information. So let me share my screen. All right. So for anybody who hasn't used this yet, this is Ledge Info, which is, it looks really complicated and scary, but I promise you it's really easy. It's just one massive database that has all the bills in it that California has pushed through the legislature that's currently in it now, and ones from the past. So this is where I hang out a lot of the time. So I'll show you kind of how to navigate this. So let's say we have a bill that we're really interested in that we've heard about, and we want to go in and look it up. So you can do a quick bill search here and just type in the name. So say SB 222, because that's one of the bills that Climate Action California is interested in. So here you can kind of see a lot of information. This first page is going to take you to the main text page, and it shows you not only the bill number, the name of the bill, that's going to give you a general idea of what the bill is going to be about, when it was last amended, who the author is who introduced the bill, and if there are any co-authors. And co-authors are basically people who have signed on to it and want to help promote it. Now you'll see there's red text and there's blue text. And this is basically the difference between when a bill is amended and what the original text says. So you'll see the red is crossed out to show that that's what originally was in the bill. This is kind of an interesting one because it was introduced first in March of last year. And Weiner did a basic gut and amend, which is what Janet was mentioning earlier. So all of this is completely new information. All this blue text is what was put in to replace the red text that was previously in the bill. So it wasn't even about heat pumps previous to this. It was a completely different thing altogether. So when you're going through it, it talks a little bit about like the Legislative Council's digest. And this top area, it looks intimidating again. But this is kind of the layman's terms of what's going to be in the bill text. This is going to tell you all the things that this bill is trying to accomplish. And you'll see that a lot of bills that are introduced are actually amendments to previous bills. It's not like creating a whole new law in itself. A lot of times it is just adding new or retracting some things that were previously in other bills that we want adjustments to. So this is one of those where it says existing law establishes things that are already in the bills, and we just want to add little tweaks to it. So when you go a little bit further, that's when you'll see the actual text of the bill. This is the one that's a little bit more complicated. If you want to read through it, there's a lot of lingo in there that's maybe a little bit more jargony, but it's also comprehensive. Like it makes sense. You can read it. I think once you've done it times, you'll pick up on what the lingo is too. It just is a little off-putting the first couple times you read it, but that's what that digest is for up at the top. So then there are tabs here that also give different information. So say we want to see how people voted on this bill. This is where you go to the votes tab here, and you'll see that this bill passed through the Senate House on the 6th of January. So this is in reverse chronological order. So at the bottom of the page was the very first thing, that the very first place that this bill went. So it was first heard in Senate Judiciary, and you can see it failed actually on the 8th of April. So there are people who voted yes, there are people who voted no, and then this NVR, that just means no vote recorded, which can sometimes mean that those legislators aren't in the committee at the hearing at the time. And sometimes that's just how people vote no without having to actually go on record for voting no. But this clearly was granted reconsideration, which is why it was brought back to judiciary again. So you can see this is the second place. It came back to judiciary and then passed on the 8th of April. And then Weiner did a gut and amend and brought it back, and that's why it was heard in the House. So this next tab, when you go through the history, this is going to talk about all the different things that have happened to this bill. So it was first, again, in reverse chronological order, it was first introduced and read for the first time in rules on 1/27/25. And it'll talk about all the different committees it went through, when it was referred to the committee, if there was any amendments to the bill. And then what's really interesting is to kind of see where these bills were in specific committee hearings and then when amendments happened. So I think that's always kind of a key thing to take note on, when you can see how amendments were added and what the opposition maybe was for that particular hearing. And we'll see that when we go to this bill analysis tab. So here you'll see when it went through Senate Judiciary, they had to do an analysis. So every single committee that it's heard in has to provide their own analysis for it. So you'll click on that, and then it'll download a PDF. And this is where there's a lot of really fascinating information. So if you ever have time to read these, they can sometimes be extensive. Maybe this was maybe not the best bill to look at because it's going to be kind of long. But it'll talk about the digest of the bill, a summary of the bill, what the proposed changes to the law are. Again, this is kind of the committee analyzing what this bill is going to be doing. We've got comments about the bill. And really down at the bottom, this is where you're going to see where there's opposition and support of these bills. And this is where I'm going to talk later on about writing support and opposition letters. And this is going to be the reason why you're going to want to do it, because you'll end up in the bill analysis under the support section. So here you see Climate Action California actually did support this bill when it was first introduced. And so they'll see us listed here with a bunch of other climate groups. And then you'll see opposition down at the bottom. What's key to keep in mind here too is you have to send in any support or opposition letters usually about a week before the bill is heard in a hearing in order to get into this bill analysis. So that's kind of an interesting thing. If you ever want to compare versions of the bill, so after they were amended, you can come in here. And again, this red and blue indicates blue is the new language and red is the old. But you can go through and see where it was amended, see like when it was first introduced, what was in there. And we can compare the version here to see this is what the original bill language said. And so there's obviously going to be no red in here because this is the red's down here because this is the only changes that happened in that very first amendment. So this was before the massive gut amend. And then the place that I think I probably go to the most is the status of the bill. This is going to tell you where it's at, who's going to hear it next, what date. So you'll go down here and again, you'll see kind of who the co-authors are. You're going to see the house that it's located in. This bill hasn't gone very far because, again, it failed the first house when it was trying to pass through. And so you can see when it goes very far, it goes, this line continues on. I'll show you in another bill. But this tells you the location of the house, when it was last amended, and the committee location. So right now it's located in local government, and they just had a hearing on it today. And so this will probably be updated usually about like midnight tonight. I'll get a little notification that says that this passed and moved on to another committee or it failed. This gives you a little brief history too. So just like the last 5 history actions, talk about that there. Now, when I was talking about getting emailed, what's really, really cool about LegInfo is you can actually track a bill. So if I'm really interested in this bill and where it's going through the process, I can click on this track a bill and let me see if I can get in here. You do have to create just an email and password to get in here. For some reason she's not liking me. And you can see all the different, so this is where you would click on to track the bill. So you would select all the different notifications if you want it. I do all of them so I know what's happening. And then you just select this and say add notifications. Now this is going to look really intimidating because I track so many bills for Climate Action California, but I have a long list. So all of these bills Anytime something interesting happens to it, I'm going to get an email notification saying that something changed with this bill. So you can see that when you go to my subscriptions here after you create an account. Another cool thing about Ledge Info that I really like is if you go to bill information, if we're interested, say, in bills that I'm going to actually go for an author. So say we're really interested in what Dawn Addis has introduced in this last 2-year session. I can search for her name and keep it under 2025's 2026 session year. And this will show you all the bills because Janet had mentioned that you only get 35 for this 2-year session. So these are the bills that she's already introduced. So this, at the end of this, is only going to be able to total 35. So it's really interesting to be able to see the bills that she is pushing through right now that she has already introduced and what's happened to the ones that were introduced at the beginning of last year. So a lot of this you can see up in chapter. Some of them are in appropriations. So this is a great tool as well, because if you want to say you don't even know what the bill's number is, and you don't even know who the author is, but say you're really interested to know if there's anything about like solar bill, like if there's solar farms or anything to do with solar energy, I can use this keyword here to search for any bills that have that in the language. And then you can find those that have this solar in here, and you can be more specific or less specific with it too. So this is a really, really great tool, I think, for climate action in California, especially to be able to use this to research what's getting pushed through, who's authoring it, and where each of these individual bills are. So again, I live here a lot. And I promise, if I can tackle this, you can tackle this, because it seems like it was going to be way super complicated when I first looked at it. And now that I've been doing it for a year, you can do it, I promise. So another place that is really important that we go to a lot, this is the California Assembly website. And this is really easy to find. Even if you just Google, you can type in California State Assembly, and it'll usually be the first page that pops up. But this is great because not only can you see who the chair is, the speaker, who is Rebus, we've talked a little bit about him, you can also see what today's hearings are. So this is going to list everything that was heard today and the things that have already adjourned. It's funny that some have still like 1:30 p.m. like it hasn't adjourned yet. So it's maybe not 100% up to date. And it talks about the legislative calendar, which is really fascinating. This is something that Janet was talking about early too, about the last days for policy committees to be heard. You can download this calendar here so you can have it in PDF. We use that a lot, so that's really helpful. Something that we go to a lot, though, is the committees. So this is going to list every single committee that is in the California State Assembly. And so if we're wanting to know a bill that's going through the Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee, we can click on this. You're going to see who the chair is, who the vice chair is, and then something that's really important is this is where you will submit a position letter. And it's going to tell you the deadline. So here, let's see if it actually does tell us. All letters received are kept for the record. It says see deadlines. So what's also interesting about this is every committee, it's not all uniform. So some of them will tell you that it's, 7 days before the hearing, you have to have your position letter turned in by. Other ones are different. Some I think are 5 days. Other ones are 10 days. But what's really helpful is they provide a phone number. And I promise you, these people are really, really nice. I have called them on many occasions and said, hey, what time do I have to have my positions letters turned in for you guys to accept them? And honestly, sometimes they even say less time that's on their website. So it's good to call. They're very, very open. So let's say we want to submit a position letter. And I'll show you one of the position letters that we've sent into. This is another one that you have to have an email and password in order to just create an account so that you can submit something. And you're going to want to sign in. And so this is where the position letter portal is. So you can see that I have submitted multiple letters for Climate Action California. And if you want to submit a new one, I'll show you actually really fast, just one that we've submitted last year. So this has our logos on it because we collaborate obviously with a bunch of different organizations. And we just wrote a support letter for SB 254 to Senator Becker. And so it kind of goes through why we appreciate this bill, what it's going to do, how it's going to be helpful. We provide data a lot of times just to help kind of nail in the point to say why this is going to be helpful. And then we sign off. And some of these committees do request that signatures are on them. So be sure to look at that committee website and see what their rules are for submitting those kind of support and opposition letters. So let's go back to this. So if we want to submit a letter, you just click on this submit a letter, and then you'll say, so we want to submit a letter for SB 222. And it's going to bring up this bill version. This is the last time it was officially amended in the Senate. And then you can easily select yourself if you're not part of an organization, or you can select the organization and make sure that you have every single organization that is on your bill proposal in there. And then we want it to go to the next committee that it's going to be heard at, which right now is set up to go to appropriations. And we want the author staff to also get a copy of the bill. And then you just upload the file. So it's super simple, super easy. Anybody can do it. You don't have to be a part of an organization. Every individual can do this as well. And it's very important for everybody who wants to get their name in the bill analysis, for the authors to hear how much support. Anytime you have data that can help move the support for them when they're talking about it in the committee, is always helpful to have. So let's go back to this Assembly government website. So this, if we want to see, let's say who the members are. This is another thing that's really great to check out, because this is going to list all of the members who are in the state assembly and the districts that they're in, whether they're Democrat or Republican. And then we can also do this for the committees themselves. So say I want to know who is on the Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials committee. Here it's going to show you members and staff. And this talks about who the chair is, who the vice chair is. And this is great too, because if you want to call Damon Connolly, and say, we really, really support a particular bill, you can call his office and say that you are very much in support of a bill that's going to be heard in this committee next week. And you can do it for all the members. It doesn't even have to be the chair. Obviously, the chair is going to have a little bit more sway than I think most other people, but it's good to call all of them if you want to, especially if you're a constituent. And then if you move over to the hearings tab, this is where you're going to see if there are hearings currently scheduled. Let's actually do a different one to get to somebody who is. So we know that we just heard, let's see, I think the energy and utilities, we care about them a lot too. So let's go to this one and see what the next hearing is for them. Here we go. So tomorrow they have a hearing set up, and it's going to be at 1:30 p.m. in the Capitol. And this is where Janet was talking about, where you can watch these hearings live. Super, super great. Very, very fascinating. Very interesting. You don't have to be anywhere near the Capitol, and we can feel like we're in the room watching this conversation. So when it's happening, you'll see this watch now button that you can click on. You can also just listen in. I think it still goes to the actual video of it, so I'm not sure what the difference between listen and watch is, but it's great to have going on, even in the background while you're cooking, just to listen to what's happening. And the arguments that they come up with, there's usually the support and the opposition who speak separately. And then all of the different committee members will talk also about questions that they have. If they feel like there needs to be amendments, they'll talk about it. So the debate that happens, I think, after they introduce the bill is really, really interesting. And you'll see the agenda also listed. So this is going to tell you which bills are going to be heard in this particular hearing on this date. And so we go here a lot too. So this is the Assembly. I'll have her questions afterwards, because the Senate is very, very similar. They have their own website. So each house has their own. So this is, again, if you just Google California Senate, this will come up. And this also talks about the upcoming bill hearings. This is their main homepage. You can also find the members here. You can find the bill hearings that are coming up. So this is, Blakespear is the chair, and we've got Valadares. So actually, I think I'm trying to remember. I can't remember now if this is 100% updated or not. But you can look at the bill hearings here. This is going to list all the ones that are coming up. So you've got the bill hearing on January 13th, which was yesterday. And then again, we can go to the committees this is the Senate Environmental and Quality Committee. So, oh, did I not go to the Senate page? Maybe that's what I did. California. That's what I did. So that was the EQ homepage. This is actually the California State Senate homepage, which is talking about Senator Lamone. That's why I was confused. I was like, I don't know why it says that Blakespear is the chair. So again, you're going to find so much information about the calendar year, how you can submit any position letters, the committees that are happening. All of this is right on this website and easy to find. So environmental quality is something that, again, we're very, very interested in. We try. Let's see if there are any other interesting. We kind of talked a little bit about the agenda and the members. Yeah, I think I can go to questions if anybody has anything that they want to hear about or talk about a little bit further with these three sources.
Sounds good. One question I had was just support if amended or oppose unless amended seem very similar, and wondering if anyone wants to speak to that little distinction. That's just a little small question that I had. But there's other questions in the chat. Maybe we should go to those first and come back to that one. Sound good? So someone was wondering if it's effective to submit position letters that address points made by the opposition. So like to read the oppositions and then try to rebut them. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, I can talk a little bit to it, but I'm sure Janet would have much better insights to this than I would. But I would say any information that you can submit in your position letters is going to be helpful because it's going to be put in that bill analysis. And so that's any data points you can share, anything that can go in there that can, again, if you're wanting to oppose something, if you can prove why it's important to oppose this particular legislation or what you think, any data you can show that is going to help the committee understand what that bill is going to do on a better playing field, I think can only help.
There are really two reasons to submit a letter to the committee. One is to just state up or down whether you support it or oppose it and get your organization's name in the bill analysis. The other is, as Amanda was just talking about, is if you think you have something substantive to say about the bill that you really want the staff who are writing the bill analysis to understand and take into account, then you write a much more detailed letter, and we send all kinds of them with footnotes, and we do a huge amount of work when we send a substantive letter. The bill analysis itself isn't normally published until like the day before the hearing. So the way the schedule goes is there's a deadline for submitting bills, comments, letters, and it's a week or 5 days or something before the hearing, which gives the staff time to review all the comments and write the bill analysis. So it's helpful to know, as the question was asking, what the opposition, if it's a bill that we're in favor of, we want to know what the opposition thinks so that we can address those questions. And the way to find that out is to call the author's office ask for the staff person, ask who the staff person is who's in charge of that bill, and then just, have a heart to heart with that person and say, so what is it that the objectors are claiming is the problem with this bill? And they'll level with you instead, or they'll send you a copy of the letter from the opposition, and then you can write a strategic letter to the committee.
And then there were two questions just with bill ideas. One was about protecting wetlands for their carbon sequestration and flood prevention benefits, and one was about data center legislation. I'm not sure if you want to get into that, but just wanted to pass those questions on.
Well, we have a team working on data centers. Um, we have had a couple of meetings with legislators who have carried data center bills in the past. I'm not aware of something that's being introduced for 2026, but it's early yet. And we have some great people working on this, and they would love more volunteers to join that little data center team, which is developing our positions and also watching for bills. The other question that you asked was about wetlands.
Yeah, wetlands protection for their protect the climate sequestration potential and flood reduction benefits.
Well, we also have an extremely active natural resources team that is always happy for new people and new energy. So for sure, again, it's so early. I'm not aware of bills that are working on that yet, but they may be coming, and we'll be watching for them when they are introduced.
Yeah, those were the questions that I noticed. Some of them were answered in the chat, so those are the ones remaining. And someone just asked for a little time at the end to copy the chat, but there'll be a little pause to do that. We have a few more slides to cover, so I don't know if we want to just get into that now, make sure we finish, or
Well, I think there's just a couple slides left. I was going to talk briefly about the budget. And if people are interested, we can do that. But I'm glad we've been able to take as many questions as we can. Do you want to go back to the slides, and we'll go to these budget slides? So this is the budget process in California is a little mysterious, and it took me a while to work it out, but I think we've got it at this point. So California has to pass a balanced budget. We can't run a deficit the way the feds can. And that's a big deal that haunts everybody. So this past weekend, Governor Newsom introduced his draft budget for 2026. There are budget committees and topic-specific budget subcommittees in both houses that will start meeting, reviewing the governor's proposals and thinking about how they would like to change them. The legislature passes the budget. They pay a lot of attention to what the governor wants, but they don't always give him what he wants. And the 15th of May, which is a month after tax day, the governor releases a revision. It's called the May Revise, which is very ungrammatical, but that's what it's called. That is based on the actual tax receipts from April 15th. By June 15th, the legislature has to pass a budget. And then the governor has 2 weeks to sign it by the 1st of July, and he does have a line item veto. So that's kind of the most of it. But then there's all kinds of adjustments that happen between July 1st and the end of the session. There are trailer bills that essentially instruct agencies as to how to implement some of the line items in the budget. And as we said earlier, some of our proposals for bills are probably will probably be arguing to get them included in the legislature's budget as line items. And then there are trailer bills. So, and there are these interesting things called Budget Bill Junior, which doesn't make any sense either, but it's essentially kind of a rider on the current budget. So it's the budget process sort of lurches along through the end of the session. Next slide, please. So just a few details about what we've just seen. The whole budget for California is $349 billion. We'd heard figures from 30 billion to 19 billion as the projected deficit. It comes out at 2.9 billion. And this is mostly attributed to a lot of tech people doing extremely well because of AI. So, as you probably know, the California budget since Prop 13 is really pretty much dependent on income taxes. And all those rich dudes in Silicon Valley are really holding up the budget to a tremendous extent. And there's always the possibility of a major correction. But that's why we have a rainy day fund, and it's pretty exciting. But the fact that the deficit is only about $3 billion is much better than what we were expecting. So there's less money for climate and for housing and homelessness, and a lot more money for education and healthcare, because those seem to be the places where the federal government is cutting California's subsidies. The governor did put in $200 million for EV incentives. He did not add extra money for electric heavy-duty trucks, which is something that we've advocated for a long time. And there's undoubtedly going to be a lot of dickering in the legislature about exactly how that $200 million is going to get spent. Some of the climate funding is a little ephemeral. It's going to come from something called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is where the proceeds from Cap and Invest, formerly known as Cap and Trade auctions, comes from, and also Prop 4, which is the big climate bond that was passed in 2024. We've been waiting to hear whether the governor was going to do what he said he was going to do and provide, Jonathan can correct me, I think it's $750 million that the Bay Area transit agencies need in order not to just collapse. They're still trying to recover from losing so much ridership and so much of their good reputation during the pandemic. So that's what we know about the budget so far. Stay tuned. It's going to be a continuing saga for a long time. And it's exactly 7 o'clock. So what I can tell you, we can happy to stay around and answer questions. But I do encourage everybody to tune in next Wednesday, because we're going to be talking about how we work to get this done. And I think there's another slide after this, but I'm not sure. Oh, next week's training. I'm sorry. Yes. These are the high points that we're going to be hitting next week. Questions?
And just before that, can we go to the last slide here? Yeah. Do you want to speak to this real quick? I put it in the chat too, but
Sure. We would love to have you if you're, I know I've been looking at the list of who's here. There are a lot of new people and a lot of people who've been working with us before. We would love to suck you into our work. So the QR code on the right is to our volunteer sign up page. And when you volunteer, you'll probably get a call from Linda, who will be talking you through the possibilities. And if you don't have time to volunteer and you would like to support us financially, that's also really important and very helpful. We just had a successful fund drive at the end of the year, but we're starting up again, and we need to support this work and our fabulous staff, and we need your help. That's my pitch. Back to questions. And we're happy to stay here and answer questions for a few minutes.
This was I thought, a really great question Pam had. If the state has to pass a balanced budget, how is there a deficit?
Oh, um, well, there won't be a deficit when it's passed. But if you look at last year's budget and what we think we need to keep going as we have been, and then you look at projected revenue, that's the difference is the deficit. So I guess the I guess the better way to describe it would be to say that up until like December, the Legislative Analyst's Office had been predicting that we would have $19 billion less than we figure we need to spend in order to keep programs going and continue working on climate change. Does that make sense? Hope so.
Yeah, and then I see Glenn put a question in the chat about the rainy day fund. What's its status?
So I was reading about the rainy day fund today. John Laird, the chair of the budget committee, who I really like and respect, and I think he'll do a good job, has suggested that we add a little bit more to the rainy day fund. The rainy day fund makes sense for California just because the source of our revenue is income taxes, which are going to rise and fall with the fortunes of Silicon Valley and the stock market. So it's it's a dodgy proposition. And 3 years or so ago, we had a gigantic surplus, which we pretty much spent. A lot of it on climate action. But these days it's tighter, and in the future, who knows?
So under what conditions do we dip into that rainy day fund? Glenn's wondering.
I think we went into it a little bit last year. I think we didn't add to it last year, and we probably went into it for a few billion because last year's shortfall was much worse than 2.9 billion. I should go back and look, but that's my recollection.
So that is all the questions I see, just some really good comments and lots of appreciation. So glad it was helpful for people. It's great.
Well, great to have everybody here. And yeah, this is good work, and it's doable. And we're kind of fun people to do it with. So sign up, join us, and we'll get even more done. Thanks.